I pulled up to the entrance of Black Ridge National Park just as the last rays of sunlight slipped beneath the distant hills. The golden light fractured through the dense trees, casting long, eerie shadows across the narrow road ahead. I parked, grabbed my backpack, and inhaled deeply. The crisp evening air was laced with the scent of pine and damp earth, a sharp reminder that I was far from the city. This was supposed to be a peaceful weekend, just me, the wilderness, and the comforting sound of silence. Setting up camp didn't take long. Soon, a small fire crackled in the pit beside my tent, its flames flickering like ghosts against the growing dark. The temperature dropped as the purple sky deepened, and stars began to emerge, faint at first, then bolder. I let out a long breath, feeling the city's tensions start to dissolve. This was what I had been craving, a break from the relentless rush of life. I sat on a log near the fire, watching embers drift up and vanish into the night. Around me, the sounds of the forest began to fill the air. The rustle of leaves, the distant chirp of crickets, the occasional flap of wings from some unseen bird. It felt peaceful, serene, even. But beneath that calm, there was a weight, a creeping sense of isolation I hadn't expected. Cedar Hollow Trail, that's where I had decided to camp. Tucked away from the main paths, it promised solitude, far from the noise of other campers. I wanted isolation, or at least that's what I thought. Now, sitting there, with only the fire and the dark woods surrounding me, I wasn't so sure. I unfolded the park map I'd grabbed earlier at the visitor center, scanning the trails and landmarks. Black Ridge was massive, with dense forests, hidden trails, and a large lake at its heart. I had camped on the western side, where the trees stood tall and ancient, their canopies blocking out most of the remaining light. Tomorrow, I'd hike, maybe fish at the lake, and just disconnect. The fire crackled softly, but the stillness beyond it gnawed at me. The forest at night wasn't as comforting as I had imagined. It felt vast and indifferent. A cold breeze swept through the trees, and I pulled my jacket tighter around me, eyes flicking toward the woods as though expecting something or someone to be watching from the shadows. I shook off the feeling. Just nerves, I told myself. Nothing more than the unease that comes with the unfamiliar. Still, the silence of the night felt too perfect, too absolute, as if the world was holding its breath. I glanced at my watch. 8:30 p.m. The fire was now the only source of light, its glow barely reaching the tree line. The moon, half hidden by the clouds, offered little in the way of comfort. I leaned back, trying to settle into the stillness, but the nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach refused to leave. Something about this place felt wrong. It wasn't the quiet, it was the kind of quiet that gets under your skin, the kind that whispers of things hiding just beyond your sight. Then, from somewhere far off, I heard it, a sound that didn't belong. At first, I thought it was the wind, a low, distant howl that echoed through the trees. But as the sound lingered, something about it felt off. It was too deep, too heavy, vibrating through the stillness in a way that made the air feel thick and oppressive. My body tensed, a primal response, as the hair on the back of my neck stood on end. I stood from the log, instinctively scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. The woods were dense, the shadows thick, and my small campfire did little to push them back. I tried to tell myself it was just an animal, maybe a wolf or a coyote. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. There was something deliberate in that sound, something that felt like a warning. Grabbing my flashlight, I clicked it on and swept the beam across the trees. The long, skeletal shadows of the trunks swayed slightly as the breeze picked up, but nothing else moved. My heart thudded in my chest, each beat growing louder in the silence. My instincts screamed at me to stay alert, to be ready for something. That's when I saw them. Two small, glowing red dots, eyes, staring at me from the tree line, unblinking. I froze, the flashlight trembling in my hand as I tried to process what I was seeing. The eyes didn't move, didn't shift. They just hovered there, locked on me, watching. I took a shallow breath, my pulse racing as a cold sweat broke across my skin. For a moment, the world narrowed to just those eyes, everything else falling into the background. My mind scrambled for an explanation, but nothing made sense. I'd heard stories about strange creatures in the woods, tall tales to scare campers, urban legends about things that shouldn't exist. But now, looking at those eyes, those stories didn't seem so far-fetched. The figure behind the eyes began to emerge from the shadows, slowly, deliberately. It was massive, towering over the underbrush. Its shape was vaguely human, but twisted, wrong. The outline of its body was hulking, covered in matted fur that shifted in the firelight, and its head, that was what made my blood run cold. The head was long and angular, like a goat's, with large curling horns that jutted menacingly upward. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stood there, watching me. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. My legs felt rooted to the spot, my brain struggling to comprehend what I was looking at. This couldn't be real. It had to be a trick of the light, my imagination playing games with me. But no matter how hard I blinked or tried to rationalize it, those eyes remained, burning into me. Panic surged through me, my body acting on pure instinct. I turned and bolted, my feet pounding against the dirt as I ran blindly into the dark. I didn't care where I was going. Anywhere was better than facing that thing. The only sounds I could hear were the rapid thudding of my heartbeat and the rustling of leaves as I tore through the woods. Behind me, in the distance, came another howl. But this time it was closer. Too close. I ran as fast as I could, my legs burning with each frantic step, my breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps. The forest seemed to close in around me, branches slapping against my arms and face as I crashed through the underbrush. Moonlight filtered weakly through the canopy, offering just enough light to see the vague outline of trees ahead. But I didn't care where I was going. I just needed to get away. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I had seen. It was impossible. No one ever really believes in monsters, not until they're staring one in the face. But the creature, with its grotesque, goat-like head and hulking body, it was no legend. I had seen it, those burning red eyes fixed on me, and now it was hunting me. Suddenly, my foot slammed into a root, and I stumbled forward, crashing to the ground. For a brief moment, panic surged through me as my face hit the dirt, the fear of being caught making my heart race even faster. I gasped, scrambling to my hands and knees, frantically glancing around. I couldn't afford to stay down. With shaking hands, I pushed myself up, adrenaline erasing any pain before it could take hold. There was no time to assess or hesitate. I had to move. In the distance, through the haze of fear and exhaustion, I spotted something. A structure. Small, wooden, with a slanted roof. It looked like an old ranger's kiosk. Relief flooded through me. Maybe there was help, or at the very least, a place to hide. I limped toward it, my breath ragged, each step sending sharp jolts of pain through my body, but I didn't dare slow down. The kiosk loomed ahead, dark and abandoned, but it was my only option. I slammed into it, clutching the rough wooden surface as though it could shield me from whatever was out there. My hands shook as I fumbled for anything useful. A weathered map hung on one wall, and beneath it, an old radio, dusty but intact. I grabbed the radio, fingers trembling as I twisted the dial, searching desperately for a signal. Static. I gritted my teeth, twisting the dial more urgently. My pulse roared in my ears, and my voice was barely steady as I leaned into the mic. Hello? Is anyone there? Please, I need help. There's something in the woods. More static. My heart sank, panic tightening its grip on my chest. Then, through the crackling noise, I heard it. A voice. Faint but clear enough to understand.
This is Tower 3. Who is this? What's going on?
Relief washed over me, though it was quickly chased by fear. How could I even begin to explain what I had just seen? Swallowing hard, I forced myself to speak.
I'm at Cedar Hollow Trail. There's something out here, something big. I don't know what it is, but it's following me.
A pause, long enough to make my stomach twist with dread.
All right, stay calm.
The voice said, though I could hear the urgency in his tone.
You need to keep moving. Head toward the lake. There's a split in the trail up ahead. When you reach it, take the path to the right. It'll lead you to safer ground.
I nodded, even though the ranger couldn't see me. Okay, I'm going. And whatever you do, he added, his voice low and tense, don't stop, just keep going. With the radio clutched tightly in my hand, I forced myself to move again, my legs carrying me forward with renewed urgency. The ranger's voice echoed in my mind. Don't stop, just keep going. I limped slightly at first from the impact of my fall, but adrenaline quickly pushed the discomfort aside. My heart pounded in my chest as I retraced my steps to the trail, eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. The moon had risen higher, casting an eerie silver light over the forest, but it barely pierced the thick shadows that seemed to wrap around everything. Every step felt heavier, as though the forest itself was conspiring to slow me down. My ears strained, searching for any sound beyond the crunch of dead leaves beneath my boots. Was the creature still following me, or had it vanished into the night? I pressed forward, trying to steady my breathing, but the silence around me was suffocating. Each moment felt like it stretched on forever, the only sound my own heartbeat. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the distance, made my pulse quicken. Was it the wind, or was it something else, something watching me from the shadows? My mind raced, replaying the image of the creature over and over again. Those red, glowing eyes, the twisted body. I had heard stories, whispers about strange creatures in the woods, but I never believed them. Yet now, with the memory fresh in my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly, undeniably wrong. I pushed the thoughts aside and kept moving, keeping my eyes focused on the ground in front of me, searching for the fork in the trail the ranger had mentioned. My legs burned, my muscles screaming in protest, but I didn't dare stop. The ranger's voice echoed again in my head. "Whatever you do, don't stop." Finally, up ahead, the trail began to split. A wave of relief hit me as I saw the fork in the road, the right path leading deeper into the woods toward the lake. Just as the ranger had said, I turned, feeling a flicker of hope. Maybe I was getting out of this nightmare after all. But then, just as I took my first step down the new path, a sound froze me in place. Something was rustling in the trees, followed by a low, guttural growl that sent ice down my spine. The forest around me seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with tension. I gripped the radio tighter, taking a cautious step back, my eyes darting between the trees. There it was again, the growl, low, menacing, and too close for comfort. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest as the growl echoed through the air. Slowly, I turned my head toward the sound, my flashlight trembling in my hand. Just off the trail, about 30 feet away, something large moved through the trees, snapping branches under its weight. A bear. Its massive form lumbered forward, its fur catching the faint light of the moon as it snorted, visible puffs of breath hanging in the cool night air. For a moment, I couldn't move. My body refused to obey, rooted to the spot by the sheer size of the animal. The bear's eyes locked onto me, and it let out another low, rumbling growl. This wasn't a curious animal, it was territorial, and I was in its way. A surge of panic hit me. I couldn't outrun a bear, not out here in the dark. My mind raced, desperately trying to remember what to do in a situation like this. Stay still? Play dead? No, not with this bear. It was too close, too aware of me. It was already sizing me up, its dark eyes narrowing with each step it took toward the trail. I took a shaky step backward, every muscle in my body tense, ready to run at the first sign of aggression. My grip on the radio tightened, hoping, praying that the ranger's voice would crackle through with some guidance. But the radio remained silent. Then, before I could react, that same bone-chilling howl echoed through the forest, the same one I had heard when I first saw the glowing red eyes. But this time, it was much closer. The bear heard it too. Its head snapped toward the direction of the sound, its ears flattening against its skull. And in an instant, the massive creature did something I never thought I'd see. It backed away. The bear, this huge, powerful animal, was trembling. Its body shuddered as it let out a startled huff, eyes wide with fear as it stared into the darkness. My breath caught in my throat. If that thing could scare off a bear, what chance did I have? The red eyes appeared again, floating between the trees, watching. The creature was back, and it was closer than ever. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. Panic took over, and I bolted, running as fast as my legs would carry me. Branches tore at my skin, the underbrush tangling around my feet, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. All I could hear was the thundering of my heartbeat and the distant growl of the creature behind me. I had to keep running. I ran, my body moving purely on instinct now, driven by fear and adrenaline. The pain from earlier was a distant memory, dulled by the overwhelming need to survive. The trees around me blurred, their shadows stretching and warping as I barreled through the dense forest. But I had no idea where I was going. The trail had long disappeared, swallowed by the undergrowth, and I was running blindly through the wilderness. The only light came from the faint moon above, its glow barely cutting through the thick canopy. Every now and then, a branch snapped under my feet or a rock shifted beneath me, threatening to send me tumbling. But I couldn't stop. Stopping wasn't an option. My breath came in ragged gasps, and I reached into my pocket, fumbling for the radio. I pressed the button, my voice shaky as I called out,
"Hello? Ranger? I don't know where I am. I'm lost."
The static on the other end was all I could hear for a moment, and my stomach twisted with dread. Finally, the ranger's voice crackled through the noise, faint but clear.
"I hear you. Stay calm."
I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding.
"I saw it again."
I panted, my voice barely steady.
"It scared off a bear. What the hell is this thing?"
There was a pause on the other end, and when the ranger finally spoke, his voice was low, careful.
"People have been talking about it for years. Some say it's just a story. Others, they swear they've seen it. But you're not the first person to go missing in these woods recently. Whatever it is, we don't fully understand it."
His words sent a chill down my spine, but I didn't have time to dwell on it.
"I need to get out of here,"
I said, panic rising in my throat.
"I'm off the trail. You said to head toward the lake, but I'm lost." "All right, listen carefully,"
the ranger replied, his voice calm but urgent.
"Do you have a flashlight?"
"Yeah," I answered, my breath still coming in gasps.
"Good. I want you to point it up at the sky. I'm scanning the area from the tower. If you can get a clear beam of light, I'll spot you."
I hesitated for a moment. Pointing the flashlight up meant revealing my position, and I had no idea where that creature was now. But what choice did I have? With shaky hands, I pulled the flashlight from my pocket and pointed it upward, the beam cutting weakly through the branches above. For what felt like an eternity, there was nothing but static on the radio. Then, the ranger's voice came through again, this time with a note of relief.
"I see you. Hold tight. I'm going to switch on the spotlight from the tower. Follow the direction it points, but be careful. The terrain between you and the trail is rough. You'll need to watch your step."
Suddenly, a bright beam of light pierced through the trees ahead, illuminating a path in the distance. A wave of relief washed over me. I had a direction, something concrete to follow. I pushed forward, my feet stumbling over roots and loose rocks as I tried to keep the beam of light in sight. The ground was uneven, just as the ranger had warned, and each step felt more treacherous than the last. If I could just reach the trail again, everything would be fine. That's what I kept telling myself. The ranger would guide me from there, and I would have a clear path to safety. I couldn't afford to think about what would happen if I didn't make it. The terrain began to level out, and I could see the trail ahead, a thin line of packed dirt winding through the trees. Relief washed over me as I stepped back onto the path, the dense underbrush finally giving way. I had made it. I was back on solid ground. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope. Maybe I could outrun this nightmare. Maybe, with the ranger's help, I could make it out of these woods alive.
"I'm on the trail,"
I shouted into the radio, my voice trembling with exhaustion and a cautious sense of optimism. "I'm heading toward the light." Static crackled in response, and I waited, my heart thudding in my chest as I listened for the ranger's voice. It took a few seconds longer than I expected, long enough to make a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach.
"Good."
The ranger's voice finally came through, but something about it was different.
"Keep going. Don't stop."
There was something off in his tone, a tremor that hadn't been there before. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I wanted to ask him what was wrong, but I didn't. I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was going on, something he wasn't telling me. I quickened my pace, the spotlight growing brighter as I drew closer. The fear that had weighed so heavily on me was starting to lift, replaced by a cautious sense of urgency. If I could just keep moving, I would be safe. But then the air around me changed. At first, it wasn't a sound. It was more like a shift in the atmosphere. The forest, which had been full of distant rustling and the occasional snap of branches, suddenly went silent. The trees, the ground, the very air itself seemed to hold its breath. My skin prickled, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. I slowed my steps, my eyes scanning the darkness around me. And then, through the static of the radio, I heard it. A soft whisper, barely audible but unmistakable.
"It's here. It's coming."
My blood ran cold. I I gripped the radio tighter, my breath caught in my throat.
What did you say?
I whispered, afraid to speak any louder. There was more static, long and broken, before the ranger's voice came through again. This time, it was filled with fear.
The thing is climbing the tower.
I stopped dead in my tracks, the world tilting around me as the weight of his words sank in. My mouth went dry, and for a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't think. Then, without warning, a howl shattered the night. It was so loud, so raw, that it reverberated through the ground, shaking the very air around me. My body went rigid with terror, every muscle locked in place. The spotlight, the only beacon I had, flickered once, twice, and then it was gone. Darkness swallowed everything.
Hello?
I screamed into the radio, my voice breaking with panic.
Hello, are you still there?
But the only response was the hiss of static. Then, through the crackling noise, came a voice, low, menacing, and far too close. It wasn't the ranger's voice.
I'm coming for you.
The forest blurred around me as I ran, my legs moving on pure instinct. The darkness felt heavier now, almost suffocating, closing in from all directions. My breath came in shallow, ragged gasps, and the fear clawing at my chest drove me forward. Every ounce of energy was focused on reaching the tower. Up ahead, I saw the silhouette of Tower 2 against the night sky. Relief surged through me. I pushed harder, my legs burning with the effort, my heart pounding in my ears. The parking lot and the tower loomed ahead, the only chance I had. The gravel of the lot crunched beneath my feet as I skidded to a stop in front of the car, my hands shaking as I fumbled for the keys in my pockets. I reached inside, nothing. My heart dropped, cold realization washing over me like ice. The keys were still in my backpack, back at the campsite. Useless. Panic gripped me as I glanced around, the dark, empty lot stretching out before me like a desolate wasteland. I had no other options. I wasn't going to outrun this thing, not without the car. My eyes darted to Tower 2, standing tall and foreboding just beyond the lot. It wasn't much, but it was my only chance. The tower was built to withstand the elements, sturdy and raised high off the ground. If I could make it up there, maybe, just maybe, I'd have a chance to defend myself. Or at least hide. Without thinking, I abandoned the car and sprinted toward the base of the tower, my feet pounding against the gravel. My hands shook as I grabbed hold of the cold metal rungs of the ladder, the weight of my body making the structure creak beneath me. I started to climb, my heart racing with every step. The ladder groaned under my weight, but I kept going, forcing myself upward, higher and higher. I reached the top and collapsed onto the wooden platform, pressing myself flat against the floor, trying to become part of it. The night was deathly still, the moon casting long shadows across the parking lot below. A few faintly glowing street lamps dotted the area, their light sparse and weak, but enough to catch glimpses of movement. I shifted slightly, peering through the narrow gaps between the wooden planks, straining to see what was down there. My breath caught in my throat as I saw shadows shifting across the parking lot. Slow, deliberate movements, but nothing distinct. The figure moved between the dim pools of light cast by the street lamps, blending in with the darkness around it. I couldn't make out its shape clearly, just vague outlines. It was large, that much I could tell, but it didn't move like any animal I knew. It was too deliberate, too calculated. The tension in my chest tightened, my pulse thundering in my ears as I tried to make sense of the thing below. I squinted, my eyes following its movements. It was circling, its shadowy form dipping in and out of the light. At one point it paused and I could see the outline of a hunched figure, but no details, only shadows. I froze, every muscle tense, barely daring to breathe. Then, without warning, the creature's head snapped upward. My heart seized in my chest. It was looking directly at me, or at least it felt that way. I couldn't see its eyes, couldn't see its face, but the way it moved, the way it paused, it knew I was up here. I lay perfectly still, my breath shallow, praying that I hadn't been seen. Every nerve in my body screamed for me to run, but I couldn't move. My hands gripped the wood beneath me, my heart thudding so loudly I thought it would give me away. For a moment, time seemed to stretch impossibly long, each second dragging into an eternity. The shadows below shifted again, and the creature seemed to tilt its head, as if considering what to do next. I felt my stomach churn with dread. It was only a matter of time before it came for me. Then, through the heavy silence, came the sound of distant sirens. The creature hesitated. The sharp wail of the sirens cut through the tension like a blade. The figure below stiffened, its movements sharp and agitated. It looked away, distracted by the growing sound. Hope flickered weakly in my chest. The police, they were coming. I stayed frozen, the sirens growing louder with each passing second. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the creature vanished into the shadows, melting into the darkness beyond the parking lot. I stayed where I was, trembling from fear and exhaustion. The sound of the sirens drew closer, but the knot of dread in my stomach remained. Because even though it was gone, I knew this was still out there, somewhere, watching. The morning light filtered through the thin curtains of the small motel room, casting soft golden streaks across the bed. I lay there, staring up at the ceiling, still trying to process everything that had happened the night before. My muscles ached, every part of me sore from the desperate flight through the forest. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the weight pressing down on my chest, the terror that clung to my mind like a fog I couldn't shake. The police had arrived just in time. Their sirens cutting through the night had been a last gift from the ranger, a man I would never meet in person. I found out later that he had called for help, reporting that a huge creature was attacking his position at the tower. It was his call that had brought them to the park, that had likely saved my life. But the ranger hadn't been so lucky. His body hadn't been found whole. Just pieces, torn apart in what they were calling one of the most brutal bear attacks ever recorded in the area. Or at least that's what they were telling people. But I knew the truth. It wasn't a bear. Whatever had attacked him, it was the same thing that had hunted me. After what felt like hours of questioning, they had driven me to this small motel on the outskirts of the nearest town. They told me to rest, to take it easy. But how could I rest? How could I calm down after what I had experienced? I sat up slowly, wincing at the stiffness in my limbs. My clothes were still damp from the night before, the faint smell of smoke from the campfire clinging to them. I needed a shower, needed food, but none of that mattered. All I could think about was the creature, the shadows I had seen, the way it had looked up at me. Grabbing my phone from the nightstand, I scrolled through the local news. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe some confirmation that what I had seen was real. But the headlines were painfully mundane. Then, one article caught my eye. Park ranger found dead in Black Ridge National Park. Apparent bear attack blamed. My stomach lurched, bile rising in my throat. A bear attack, that's what they were calling it. But I knew better. The ranger, the one who had been guiding me through the radio, he was dead. I squeezed my eyes shut, the image of the tower flashing in my mind. The terror in his voice when he said it was climbing the tower. I tossed the phone aside, rubbing my hands over my face, trying to push the thoughts away, but I couldn't shake it. The dread, the gnawing fear that something much worse was out there, lurking in the woods. And the worst part? I knew this wasn't over. Whatever that thing was, it was still out there, watching, waiting. And I had a feeling it wouldn't be long before it struck again.